It is no secret that video games are among one of today's most popular forms of entertainment. Video games are very fun, they provide instant gratification, entertainment, and are relatively easy to master. Now, how do children balance video games with other activities? Well, for most people this is not an issue, but for some, the improper use of video games may interfere with a healthy lifestyle, which gives us the only option of learning how to play video games in a responsible manner. Now, according to an August 2005 issue of the Reader's Digest, Robert F. Howe stresses the importance of awareness for parents concerning the genres and types of video games that our children are playing, as well as how much time our children are spent gaming. Now, in order for us to take immediate action in this fast-rising issue, we must first identify the key problems associated with video games. Secondly, we will discuss what causes these problems and how they affect us and our society. And finally, we will survey different methods that we can use to prevent each problem from happening. Now, the rise in popularity of video games has raised great concern for many, and it has been suggested that playing certain types of video games can affect our children in long-lasting and harmful ways, which brings me to my first main point, the key problems associated with video games. Now, video games present various hazards and risks to include increased aggressive attitudes, extreme psychological dependencies, as well as possible brain damage triggered through video game epilepsy. Now, playing violent-themed video games may lead to increased attitudes, desensitized values, as well as ultimately acting out in extreme violent behavior. Now, according to a study done in 2009 by the American Academy of Pediatrics, the strength association between media-based violence and increased aggressive behaviors are stronger than the association between poor calcium intake to decreased bone mass, lead ingestion, and lowered IQ scores, condom non-use, and sexually acquired HIV infections, and are nearly as strong as the association between cigarette smoking and lung cancer. Now, further extensive research on media-based violence have shown that amongst the various different types of media-based violence to include, but is not limited to, movies, television, or even music, video games have shown to be the greatest contributor towards the strength association between the two. Now, the problems associated with video games may not always be physical in nature, whereas the overuse of certain video games may lead to extreme psychological dependency, or more broadly put, video game overuse is the excessive or compulsive use of certain computer and video games that directly results in an interference with daily life activities. Now, aside from the obvious problems such as violence and addiction, there's a third fairly uncommon issue at hand that often goes unseen. Now, individual cases of video game epilepsy have been reported since early 1981, and the sales of these types of video games really took off towards the end of 1992, which brought another rising concern about the epileptic potential of video games. Now, in order for us to prevent these problems from happening, we need to dig deeper into the roots of our troubles and find out what's exactly causing these problems and how they affect us in our society, which brings me to my second main point, causes and effects. Lieutenant Colonel David Grossman, a former West Point Academy psychology professor, has been interviewed on the content of his books, and he has repeatedly used the term murder simulator to describe first-person shooter-themed video games. Now, he argues that video game publishers unethically train children in the use of these types of weapons, as well as, more importantly, harden them emotionally towards the act of murder by simulating the killing of hundreds or even thousands of opponents in a single typical video game. Now, in a March 2009 issue of a parenting magazine, Pediatrics for Parents, Tammy Darling describes how the effects or symptoms of video game overuse are extremely similar to those of other proposed psychological addictions, such as compulsive gambling, which is a recognized form of an impulse control disorder. Now, studies that were published in the Lancet Medical Journal and done by neurologist Craig Anderson supports the idea that video game epilepsy occurs within patients who are diagnosed with a genetically determined photosensitive trait. Now, this specific type of mental disorder is called photosensitive epilepsy, or PSE. And another study done in 1994 by Castellage Trennet, another neurologist from the Netherlands, worldwide there's over 50 published cases of seizures likely to be related to the use of video games. And the average age of these patients are 13 years old, range from 1 to 36, and 75% of these patients are males. Now that we've identified the key problems and discussed their causes and effects, we must now find a solution to these problems, which brings me to my final main point, proper preventative measures. Now, in order to avoid the problem of increased aggression and violent behavior, we must first observe the Entertainment Software Rating Board, or the ESRB, game ratings located in the bottom portion of the backside of any video game. And again, monitor your children's gameplay and come up with a decision of whether your children are even mature enough to play these types of video games. To combat the risk of addiction, be sure that all the players involved have a clear understanding and can distinguish the difference between fantasy and reality. And if you find yourself or others starting to play excessively with almost no control of stopping, then simply limit your game time. China recently proposed a new law which prohibits the use of online video game playing for more than 3 hours a day. Now, to combat the risk of video games triggering epilepsy, again, check the video games itself for any epilepsy warnings as displayed here and here, and should be shown somewhere in the vicinity of ESRB rating. And again, ask your video game store clerk if this particular video game has had any past history of problems causing seizures. And again, monitor your children's gameplay once again. Be on the lookout for flashing lights, rapidly alternating changing images, bold patterns, or regular moving patterns. And again, finally, please sit at a safe distance away from the television screens. That's probably the biggest thing. And now that we have discussed several different methods that we can take into consideration, it is now our responsibility to apply them. Today I have informed you about the various dangers involving video games, to include increased aggressive behaviors and violent attitudes, extreme psychological dependency, and possible brain damage triggered through video game epilepsy. We have discussed what causes each problem and how they affect us in our society. And finally, we have surveyed different methods that we can use to prevent each problem from happening. I hope that I have made each and every one of you aware about the possible dangers involving the improper use of video games, and I hope that I've motivated each and every one of you to take the proper precautionary steps into preventing these dilemmas from happening.